Thanks for joining me for this February edition of Local Image, our first all-new show for the new year. And I couldn't be happier to welcome back our first guest for 2015. He is author Jonathan Odell, and his new book, Miss Hazel and the Rosa Parks League, was just released this month to great reviews. It's so nice to have you back here, Jonathan.
Well, it's great to be here, Judy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we had you here in 2012.
I was looking at the dates. It was
Yes.
it was around June, I think.
Yeah,
like that.
and we talked about your book, The Healing, which is
Right.
actually the second novel that you wrote. And this current book is, I guess you call it a reimagining of the first book,
That's right.
which was A View from Delphi. How did that come about? What's that all about?
The View from Delphi came out in 2004. It was my first book. And I was learning to write on the book. And I really thought it'd probably be the only book that I would ever write. So I put everything into it. It was a 500-page book, which is really big for a first-time author. And I sold it without an agent and got a small publisher, McAdam Cage, to release it at the time. McAdam Cage usually does a great job, but they had just signed on their first mega seller, which was The Time Traveler's Wife.
Oh my goodness.
So it sucked all the resources out of the release. So I had a big release in Minnesota and a big release in my home state of Mississippi on both ends of the river. It did great here. It was Talking Volumes pick. It was Carrie Miller's very first choice, her very first show. And then it went to paperback, but because McAdam Cage really didn't have the finances to promote it, it kind of went away. And when the second book came out, The Healing, it did so well, my agent called me up and she says, "Oh my gosh, I just read your first book." And I said, "Yeah, Marley, how'd you like it?" She says, "This is so much better than The Help. I'm so angry. It should have got more attention." And I said, "Well, that's music to my ears. You can keep telling me that." And she said, "If we only had the rights." And I said, "Well, McAdam Cage just went under and the rights reverted to me."
Oh my goodness.
So Marley Rusoff is my agent. She's agent to Pat Conroy and several of the other big mega stars. So she said, "You know, I'm really interested, and there are a lot of books like yours who, through no fault of their own, are great books, get great reviews, but nobody hears about them. So I want to pick those books up and do a really nice job on them, make them have beautiful covers, things that you can feel and see, and she says, "But if you do this, we need to do a rewrite." And I went, "Oh, okay, what's that?" And she says, "Well, the book is about two women, Vida and Hazel. And the book is about that relationship, but they don't meet until page 240 in the book." She says, "Everything you wrote is beautiful. It is beautiful dialogue, beautiful language, except it doesn't drive the story. What I love to see is you reimagine the book where they meet a little earlier, so the reader can be a little bit more into the relationship."
It's great. The characters are, I mean, you just bring them to life so beautifully. And actually, tell us a little bit more about the characters, because Miss Hazel is based on your own mom.
Much to her horror, when I first wrote the book, it was based on my mother, who is still living. She'll be 87 on February the 12th.
Good for her.
And she's going to be the guest of honor at a reading we're going to do of the book in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. When I wrote the book, wrote the book, I really had two questions in mind that I wanted to answer. One was, how did my family get to be as crazy as they were? And a lot of that has to do with my mother. She is a real character, and luckily with a good sense of humor. And the other one was, I didn't get to Minnesota. I had a career in business. I didn't start writing until I was 45. And it wasn't until I lived here in Minnesota for several years away from Mississippi that it hit me that I lived around African Americans all my life, but I never saw them. I didn't even know what their story was, except for the story that it was safe for them to project to us, which was, "Oh, we're happy, we love white people, and we love working for you." And I realized, wow, that's what we forced them to say. So I know nothing about who they were. So the other question was, what went on beyond my white bubble within the black community? Who were the heroes? Who were the villains? What were their lives like? How were they living out their days when they weren't responding to white folks.
Right.
Because they had their own lives. So and I started with the second woman is Vida. I knew her for about a year when I was 5 years old, and my mother hired her when my mother wanted to try working again. And Vida and I had one thing in common. She hated me as much as I hated her. It wasn't one of those family stories where the maid is one of the family and et cetera. No, we were
at odds.
We were competitors, and we were competing for. I wanted my mother to come back. I thought because she came to work, my mother had to leave the house, and it was my job to take care of my mother. Even then, she needed taken care of. It was my job to take care of my brothers, not this woman who walked in.
Right.
So I would make up lies about her. I would tell my mother that her name was actually Alma, that Alma had worn my mother's clothes while my mother was gone.
Oh my goodness.
Which in the South and the Jim Crow, black people don't wear white people's clothes. I told my mother that Alma was stealing coffee, because I always heard my father say about how expensive coffee was. So I would take coffee, throw it down the drain, and blame it on the maid.
Goodness.
I did everything I could to get her fired. And finally she left after about a year. I didn't know until years and years later in writing this book how much danger I put that woman in. Because even the word of a 5-year-old kid could get a black woman killed in those days. So that was a tension I wanted to bring to the story. I wanted to focus on that power differential between these two women. And I wanted the child who's looking for a mother to be thrown in between them. Both women have lost their first children.
Right.
Through grief. That's about the only thing they have in common.
Right.
Besides their distrust and hatred for each other is their loss of their children.
And there are so many other great characters in this book, and they all are dealing with these different issues. I mean, different perspectives on kind of they're all in this together, but they all bring something different that they're dealing with, and you almost have some sympathy for some of the bad people.
Thank you.
You
That's
know what
the
I
highest
mean?
compliment you could pay an author.
You almost
Thank
have
you.
some sympathy for the bad people. But the thing is that even today now, I mean, as an author reflecting on your own past and writing a book like this and seeing what's been happening in the news lately, what's happening in our communities lately, how do you process that? How do you feel about that today?
Right. With the murders that were going on, the police shootings, whether they were justified or unjustified, just the reaction of the country put me into depression. The dialogue over were they worthy to get killed or not? Were they bad enough to be killed? No, it's like, wow, this is the conversation we were having back in the 1950s when I was growing up. Then with the whole thing with the Selma movie, which has been fascinating, the conversation. I mean, a lot of white people do not like that movie because supposedly the director, who is a black woman, vilified LBJ. And I think the problem is white folks aren't used to seeing movies about race without the white person being the hero. White people are supposed to save black folks. And in this movie, blacks are moving out of Black History Month and saying, wait a minute, we want the whole bag. We want to tell our version of American history. And that's scary for a lot of people.
Right.
So there's been a lot of criticism. But I love what the director said in an interview. She said, you know, when I made this movie, Selma, I wanted to do something radical. I wanted to make a movie where black people think. And it was like, that's perfect. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we ready for African Americans to come on the national stage and tell their interpretation of history rather than relegating it to Black History Month? We let them have Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King in a sanitized, calmed down version. So I think the dialogue is great. I'm really excited about the book coming out at this time.
And the crux of the book, besides these great relationships, is the fact that you show Rosa Parks, this situation is happening with this uppity black woman in Alabama who's doing this thing on the bus, and it's getting all these other people in Mississippi and Delphi in the area all upset. The white
Right.
folks are all upset, and it just kind of takes you through that time period, but through the eyes of these women who find they have a little more in common than they maybe thought.
That's exactly right, and that you hit it out. You hit on one of the purposes of the book. Is that as I was doing my research, I was ready to write about black male heroes. And I found out the people who led the civil rights movement in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia were mostly women, and they never got the attention. Even Rosa Parks, I didn't know this, but she was an activist putting her life on the line long before she refused to give up her seat. She was seasoned and she was young, and yet she's been portrayed in history as this tired old woman whose feet hurt.
Right.
She was almost militant, but she needed to be calmed down. And the black preachers were to blame for that. When she wanted to address that big audience who she inspired, one of the black preachers patted her on the shoulder and says, "That's okay, Rosa, you've done enough." They needed her to be this soft icon of the movement, not a real life flesh and blood angry woman who was pushing for her rights. And I found that was true in Mississippi, that in Mississippi it was the women who, the preachers mostly fled because they didn't want the character in my book, Levi. They liked the situation they're in. They've established this comfortable position within the community where they say what the white folks want to say, and they carry things to the black folks, but they stay out of trouble. They don't rock the boat because they know if they rock the boat, they lose their church.
Yeah.
It was the women who came along. They didn't have anything left to lose but their lives. So I really wanted to emphasize what women did,
Right.
both white and black, and how they get overwritten by history.
And with all that, there's some other great plots in this book that just keep you wanting to turn that next page. I really enjoyed the book.
Thank you.
Where can folks maybe hear more about the book or see
Certainly.
you coming up?
Yes, we got a website up, and it's my name, JonathanOdell.com. So all the appearances on there. We are be touring all through February. Just hit appearances on JonathanOdell.com, and I'll keep that updated. You'll know where we'll be. And on the tour, I didn't want it just to be a white man talking. So in some of the larger locations, I've asked a friend of mine. Her name is Margaret Block. I've got her on the website as well. She helped inform the first book when I was writing. She actually, as a teenager, worked with SNCC in the 1960s in Mississippi as an activist. One of those women who put her life on the line, was chased by the Klan. They had to hurry her out of the county to get away from the Klan. They put her in the back of a hearse in a coffin to slip her across the Tallahatchie County line where Emmett Till was killed. So she's got these amazing stories.
Yes.
So we're going to talk together. I'll talk about my understanding as a white man, what I've learned through history, and then she'll bring us up to date on what the truth was in those days.
Right. Well, Miss Hazel, love that book.
Great.
Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Thank you, Judy.
Now, we'll leave the southern setting of Jonathan's book and come back to the cold realities of our Minnesota winter. But just because it's cold doesn't mean you can't have fun and be active outside. In fact, this next segment shows one way you can elevate your winter fun to a whole new level. Take a look.